Taped live in Canada, it's Jim's Record Party. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Jim's Record Party. I'm your host, James. So nice of you to be with us today as we look at 4 albums, a blues album, you can see I'm holding it now, and 3 rock albums, 4 disparate albums, and ask the musical question, these albums have something in common? Indeed they do, ladies and gentlemen. These albums have something in common. Do you know what it is? So I'll show you these albums now, of course. You've only seen one. We'll begin with the James Cotton Blues Band. This is an album called Taking Care Business. We'll proceed to the band's 3rd album, Stage Fright, on Capitol. We'll move on fairly quickly to our 3rd album, Todd Rundgren's A Wizard, a True Star. And conclude with the 4th album today, The Psychedelic Furs, Forever Now. This is from 1983, I believe, 1982 on Columbia. Do you know what it is? Have you guessed it yet? Have you guesstimated it yet, ladies and gentlemen? The commonality in these 4 albums. Let's go through them more, each in a little more depth. The James Cotton Blues Band, 1970 on Capitol, Taking Care of Business. The great harp player, one of the 3 greatest, 4 greatest, 6 greatest, 3 greatest American blues harp players of the 20th century. Taking Care of Business, 1970. Fantastic band on this. Stu Woods, been everywhere, played with everybody. Shuggy Otis, Dylan, Al Cooper, the Blay Peacock synthesizer show. I'd like to see if there's any wax on that. Jim Croce, Bette Midler, many others. Richie Hayward, great drummer for Little Feat on this album, fantastic. Another drummer, N.D. Smart, is that name familiar? The drummer with the great speckled bird, and my Canadian compatriots will recognize that name as the great band of Ian and Sylvia Tyson. Most interesting as a guitar-heavy album, Matt Murphy, of course, Jimmy Cotton's stalwart on guitar, and a foundation of American late 20th century blues guitar styles, I'd say. One of my faves of all time, Michael Bloomfield, a man named Don Triano, but I'm pretty sure he's our own Dominic Triano, Dom Triano from Bush, Mandela, late with the James Gang. And the great albino bluesman from Texas, it's Johnny Winter. Yes, they're all. Matt Murphy, Mike Bloomfield, Dom Triano, and Johnny Winter, all represented on this album. Highlights on this album, also, I'd be remiss in not mentioning the Paul Butterfield Blues Band horn section, including Dave Sanborn, is on this album. Also some great background vocals on this album. There's some highlights, She Moves Me with Johnny Winter, Nose Open, Got My Nose Open Baby with Mike Bloomfield. A couple of tracks where Dom Triano and Matt Murphy play together are fantastic. Can't Live Without Love and Goodbye My Lady. And this album closes with a great Bloomfield throwback, Georgia Swing, where both Bloomfield and Johnny Winter both play, and then it turns into a bit of a Hey Jude free-for-all at the end with about 27 people, I think, on vocals and added percussion, but it's a great send-off for this album. 1970 on Capitol, James Cotton, Taking Care of Business, our first album for consideration. Second album, the band's 3rd album, it's also on Capitol, it's also from 1970. It's their 3rd album, followed hard on the heels of their classic 2nd album, of course, the band, with The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. This is a great album, my favorite band album. more rocking than their previous two. A little less choir boy, a little more Link Wray, a little more attitude on this album. A little more, but definitely more of a rock album in sound and texture. Richard Manuel's last two written songs are in this album. Just Another Whistle Stop, bit of a rouser, send off, and also Sleeping. Beautiful, beautiful ballad. Glyn Johns, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Glyn Johns, I crack a lot of eggs over his head, but he did the mix down on this album. 1970, the band's third album, Stage Fright, on Capitol. Our third album for consideration is Todd Rundgren's fourth album, A Wizard, a True Star. Yes, a bit self-aggrandizement in the title, perhaps, but when you hear this album, you are ready to say yes. James Brown was the hardest working man in show business for a long, long time. And now you have to believe Todd Rundgren assumed that mantle. This man is everywhere all the time. This album, he is everywhere all the time. There are a few other players on a couple of tracks, but this is mostly Todd Rundgren. Outstanding in conception and performance. This album from 1973 on Bearsville, this followed his classic double album, Something Anything. And have to note the length of this album is almost 56 minutes long. Roughly 25 minutes plus per side, ladies and gentlemen. And the first side in particular is a constant run of music. There is no silence whatsoever. There's no space between tunes. It's all one free-running piece of music, we'll call it. It's many pieces of music. And many songs are joined together. All songs are joined together by interlocking pieces of music that may be more complicated and interesting than the songs that they connect. It's a fascinating and a virtuosic album. A Wizard, a True Star by Todd Rundgren on Bearsville. Fourth and final album today, The Psychedelic Furs, Forever Now. This is from 1982 and their third album, of course, with Richard Butler on vocals. I have to say, I like Richard Butler. His brother Tim on bass. And there have been an additional 23 members off and on. Change of members, return of members to this band. The highlights on this, Forever Now, Love My Way, Sleep Comes Down, President Gas. This album is also available on cassette, ladies and gentlemen, so keep an eye open for that. Those of you who are still rocking those shoulder-held units. The cassette edition of this. This is a great album. Quite thick in texture in places. It's a fantastic album. And surprisingly, the some background vocals, Flo and Eddie, yeah. Mark Volman and Howard Kalin are singing background vocals on this album. Yeah, it's Forever Now by the Psychedelic Furs. Psychedelic Furs, Forever Now, Todd Rundgren's A Wizard, a True Star, the band's Stage Fright, and Jimmy Cotton's Taking Care of Business. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, the common theme, the common element of these four albums? Well, I'm holding it in my hands, or a representation of. It's Todd Rundgren. Todd Rundgren, ladies and gentlemen. When I said he took over the mantle, the cape of the hardest working man in show business. This is not hyperbole. On the James Cotton album alone, Todd Rundgren was the co-producer, and he plays on virtually every track. And to the detriment, I would say, of many, if not most of those tracks, when you have Matt Murphy, Johnny Winter, I'm going to have a sip of coffee here, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, that's good coffee. Johnny Winter and Mike Bloomfield, Dominic Troiano, one of Canada's greatest guitarists, of course. You wonder why Todd Rundgren is playing guitar there. Well, I think it's because he was 23 years old when he co-produced that album for Capitol. He was kind of a wonderkind, not kind of, but he was a wonderkind, and was given a lot of responsibility and a lot of free play, obviously, literally. And perhaps his co-producer didn't have the reins to say, Todd, you could sit this one out. Mike Bloomfield or Johnny Winter or Dom Troiano or playing Matt Murphy or playing on this track, just sit it out or play some keyboards on it or do some vocals on it. So he plays good. He plays, as we know, Todd is Captain Many Hands, and he can play, I'm sure, every instrument he puts his hand to, as he does and represents here on this album as well. In fact, I believe he may play drums. I'm not just sure now. He's everywhere, as I say. He plays slide on this album also. So not a shy man, not a shy boy at 23 years old on this album. On the album, rather, the James Cotton album. Ladies and gentlemen, Taking Care of Business. There it is right there from 1970 on Capitol. Todd Rundgren co-produced at 23. Second album, The Band. Perhaps you saw it on the front of the covers. I was holding it. Todd Rundgren is the engineer. I was most surprised when I learned that Todd Rundgren was the engineer on one of the band's greatest albums. And a very interesting backstory. You seek it out if you're interested, on various mixes and perhaps mix downs that were done of these tunes, of this album, by Todd Rundgren on one hand and by Glyn Johns on the other hand. And they themselves have both testified in interviews that they do not know which final mixes were used. This is the original from 1970, of course. This has been re-released, as a lot of the band's material has, on a 50th anniversary basis. Some or most remixed, rescheduled, the order of the tunes, extra ephemera added to the package, etc. Seek those out at your own interest or risk. But this is the original. It originally came with a sepia looking antique-ish photograph, a wraparound. Todd Rundgren, engineer on the band's classic Stage Fright, ladies and gentlemen. Which brings us to the final of the three, and then we'll return to a wizard. Forever Now with the Furs. Yes, he produced this album. He plays keyboards, he plays sax, he co-engineered it, and it was recorded, I believe, at his studio, which is Utopia Studios, I believe, in the eponymous Bearsville, New York. For some reason, they brought the Furs, who I'm quite sure are an English band, over to America, to Bearsville, New York, which I don't believe is that large, etc. It doesn't have to be, but I'm not sure. Maybe they were between gigs on an American tour. I don't know what the backstory is. I like this album. I like Richard Butler. This album rocks. It is thick in places, and that's a bit of a Rundgren signature. He can add a bit too much at times. Yeah, it could be pared down. There is one track, at least, on the Jimmy Cotton album with, I believe, just a bass drum, a guitar part, and a vocal by Jimmy Cotton. This, nonetheless, this is a fantastic album. Forever Now. If you like the Furs, this is one of their best. Absolutely. Brings us back to Rundgren's own eponymous album, Todd Rundgren's Wizard, a True Star. This is a great album. I urge you to seek this out for a listen, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a casual album. You cannot leave the room while you listen to this, or while you listen to a side, because it's a continuous piece of music, as a piece of classical music or a longer piece of jazz would be, and requires your attention. This is very detailed, extremely detailed. If you're in that mood, detailed. It's very detailed. And as I say, some of the little, they're not little in any respect, but only in length compared to the longer pieces that they connect. Pieces are as complicated as, and interestingly in that way, I mean, as a technical exercise and as showing off Todd's abilities in every way. It's very impressive. It's impressive vocally also. I love his voice. And there's ballad work on this. And the second side has, interestingly, 3 or 4 Motown, soul, R&B tunes on it. Todd does a great version of La 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 means I love you. When it comes on, you're just smiling. When the chorus comes on, you can't do anything but sing along with it. It's fantastic. This is a great album. This is led to some very interesting journeys of his with Utopia and his idea and ideals about that. The band, the bands, the band members, about that. Yeah, read up on that. That's an interesting tome in itself, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that brings us to the end of another Jim's Record Party. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, James. It's been so nice to have you with us today as we've looked at 4 albums and asked what was the common theme, and the common theme was Todd Rundgren. I urge you to seek out more of his music, ladies and gentlemen. The great album, Something Anything, and all of his music really very, very, very good, very interesting, and one of the great ballad writers and singers ever in America, in North American, in the world pop music, Todd Rundgren. It's been so nice to have you with us today, ladies and gentlemen, as we've looked at these albums. Thank you very much for being with us, and please comment, like, and subscribe. Please join us again next time here on Jim's Record Party as we look at more interesting, rare albums, talk about some great music. I'm your host, James. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye for now.